So can I give an example of how I deload? So, so first of all, like personally, I don't deload very often because I use 3-week mesocycles. I find that it's short enough to not truly reach a point in your training where you need a deload, because by the time you switch to the next mesocycle on week 4, that first week of that new mesocycle, because it's an introductory week to the other exercises and other rep schemes and on, this week 1 to me almost serves like a deload if you want. Now, if you were to use an approach where you would do 1 upper body and 1 lower body session only, so not upper body 1, lower body 1, upper body 2, lower body 2, only 2 sessions that you have the client do twice a week. So let's say Monday upper, Tuesday lower, then Thursday, Friday you repeat upper and lower, and you were to do this for 3 weeks, for example. Now the problem is the exposure to the exact same stimulus happens 6 times within that 3-week period. Now, because it's 6 times having the exact same stimulus, at this point you would deload on the 3rd and 6th session. And what you do is you typically deload from anywhere from 40 all the way up to 60%, but not in terms of load on the barbell, you deload in terms of volume. So volume is the main thing in which the body will tend to overreach from. Okay, so this is the factor you need to manipulate. You never want to decrease the load, because if you do that, now you're detraining strength. You're learning to become weaker. So you maintain the load high, but now instead of doing, let's say, 20 sets total in a session, you only do 12. Okay, so that's the way you would do it. Now, if you're wondering why you would just do 1 upper, 1 lower and repeat, this situation would be useful with a more entry-level trainee, where the multiple exposure to the same thing would be beneficial to their learning of movement patterns. So that could be a good situation. So again, I'm repeating myself, but here you would deload on the 3rd and 6th session. If you are to do upper 1, lower 1, upper 2, lower 2, but you decide that you want to use a 4-week mesocycle, now I would deload on week 3. So week 3, you drop the volume 40 to 60%, and then you really push that week, and then week 4 you're peaking, and then you change meso. So this is how I would do it. What would be a substitution for dip for clients who can't perform it? So if you cannot perform the dip at all, but you do want to eventually perform the dip, then I would suggest a dip progression similar to our chin-up progression, where you would start by doing an eccentric method. So 10-second eccentric only, go back up, 10-second eccentric, and on and on. Then phase 2, you would do an isometric method, where you go down to a quarter, pause for 10 seconds, down midpoint, pause for 10 seconds, down bottom quarter, pause for 10 seconds, go all the way back down, cheat back up, do the same thing. And then finally, phase 3, you get assistance from a partner, so a spot, to help you through the concentric. So this would be the ideal. Now, if you can do dips because you're overweight, because you have a shoulder injury, or because you are focusing on doing a chin-up progression, for example, then the best option would be to replace the dip by a decline bench press. So the decline bench press, you could use a mid-grip, the same like grip width you would use with your dip, but the decline has a similar angle in terms of arm movement to torso than the dip would. So that would be the best alternative to it. When do I test for 1RM during the training year? I don't really, to be honest. Unless I'm dealing with the athletic population, I will typically test 1RM the week prior to starting the general preparation phase. And I'll typically test the 1RM bench press, the 1RM squat, since they're 2 mother lift in which all other lift strength ratios are based off of. But aside from that, if I'm training more like the general population or my online clients and stuff like that, I do not do 1RM tests. I don't really see the value in it. I much prefer using the estimated 1RM values with, like, from the Lander's equation, for example. So to me, it makes more sense for training purposes, because when you're testing a 1RM in a testing situation, first of all, that's the only thing you do. Like, you're warming up to this, you're priming to this for that one set, that heaviest set of 1 rep only. It's a test, you're eager, adrenaline kicks in, and on and on and on and on. So your 1RM test score will always be a higher perceived value. And the problem is, if you use that value as a guideline for the weight selection during your training program, then like, it usually never works out. Like, you tend to overtrain at that point, because you have to understand that if you're doing 6 sets of 4, well, these 6 sets of 4 will bring about way more fatigue than 1 set of 1RM. Now, if I'm doing a phase, so let's say my last intensification of a macro, I'm squatting and I'm doing 6x4, and by the end of week 3, I have my estimated 1RM value from 4 reps. You take the peak from that. Now, let's say my estimated 1RM is 200 kilos. The beauty of this is now that 200 kilo estimated 1RM is relevant for me as a loading prescription for my other phases, so for my upcoming phases, because this is a 1RM value from training. So this is a training 1RM value instead of a testing 1RM value. So that training 1RM value has way more upside for you as a coach to use for the prescription of your training. So that's why I don't really do it with the GenPop. When do you increase or decrease a macrocycle length? There's multiple reasons. If you're dealing with athletes, it will all depend on the length of the off season. If you're dealing with GenPop, it could be they have a planned vacation or business trip like coming, let's say in 14 weeks. Well, then you might as well do a 14-week macro. Their vacation will be that transition active recovery week, and then you start over after. So this is how you could do it, like simply by going about the schedule or the events in your client's life. Beyond that, if it's just kind of like a robot client that just really trains all the time, I don't see the value in changing or veering away from 12 weeks. Unless, again, you're using 4-week mesocycles and you really truly want to have 2 accumulations, 2 intensifications within the macro, then obviously your macro cycle would become 16 weeks at that point in time. Do I ever use drop sets in the A series? Not really. It can happen, but it's very, very, very rare. And you have to be very advanced, especially advanced in the terms of handling drop sets. So for me, if you look at the 1RM and rep scheme continuum chart that we have, you see a bunch of different rep schemes, from standard sets to clusters to wave loading to paler and on and on. But you'll also see drop sets. But drop sets are not a rep scheme that should be used for an A series. They should be more used for your B and C series with assistance and remedial exercises in phases where you want to drive volume up. Now, that being said, you might get to a point eventually in training where you could have a trainee who would be able to have drop sets in the C's, drop sets in the B's, and drop sets in the A's. But this is very rare, because that becomes a very, very demanding workout. It really drives the volume up quite a bit. And not only that, but drop sets on big compound primary multi-joint movements is not the easiest thing to do. So you do need to make sure you take time to get ready to do these. So generally speaking, don't use it there. So what's the difference between a standing and a kneeling leg curl machine? Obviously both of them have the advantage of being unilateral by default, which is really good when you're trying to balance out left to right hamstrings. But to be honest, the main and the only difference really is the position of your torso in relation to your femur. And what that does is, by being bent over more, which is the case for the kneeling leg curl, contrary to the standing leg curl, you're creating a pre-stretch of the fibers of the hamstring because the pelvis tilts forward. So by creating that pre-stretched onto the hamstring, now you're changing the motor unit recruitment pattern, which might be beneficial when you're trying to get a good overall development of the hamstring. If you can hit multiple motor units within the muscle, you'll have a much greater outcome at the end of your training, because you've just hit so much more aspects, so much more areas of the muscle. So that's the advantage of having these multiple leg curl machine if you're really trying to get the highest level of development. Do I ever use barbells for rows? Yeah, you can, but it's usually never my choice, my first choice. I tend to do it if I don't have a choice. Let's say the client doesn't have access to a lot of equipment and on and on. The reason is, there's two main reasons. Reason number one, a barbell bent over row, because you're leaning forward and the lower back, the posterior chain is engaged at stabilizing your torso as you're rowing. Now what happens is you have a lot of neural drive wasted on the stabilizer muscles, taking away from the upper back muscles. And to me, because rowing pattern and scap retraction are most of the time a very weak aspect of a client's musculature, I truly like to focus on these muscles and give it as much attention as I can to get the highest outcome from training. So if I can use exercises where I don't have wasted neural drive, and I can truly isolate these muscles better, I find you get stronger and you fix the issues so much faster. Which is why, if you look at my dumbbell bent over row variation, there's no wasted neural drive. My knees on the bench, my forearms on the bench, my head is on my forearm, so everything is stable, everything is engaged, which allows me to focus more on the scap retractor. So that's why I don't really use it. Now, reason number two, depending on the size of the lifter, with the barbell, if the barbell hits the gut before you reach full retraction, then you're missing out on range of motion as well. So to me, it's the least effective rowing variation you can do. Now, one advantage is you can use a lot of weight, true, but again, it distracts from the task of really strengthening the scap retractors.